Welcome to Deep Economic Thoughts with economist and best-selling author Ivan Aligne. Once in a while, Ivan shares an unscripted, though potent, idea related to economics or the capital markets. This may be of interest to financial advisors and retail investors alike. Enjoy.
Greetings, this is Ivan Aligne, the founder and chief investment officer at Aligne Wealth Advisors Investment Management, also known as AWAIM. Thank you very much for joining me this month on Deep Economic Thoughts, and I am recording this on September 12th, 2024. And this particular month, I wanted to focus on something that seems, I would think, fairly obvious, which is that the troubling economic conditions created by very high inflation that we've seen over the past few years post-pandemic is not the first time the U.S. economy has experienced something like this. And as I was preparing to write this month's Forbes article, and I always have to sit and kind of reflect on different macroeconomic issues, I somehow stumbled upon something that was actually quite shocking to me and ultimately became the subject of this month's Forbes article and also this month's research highlight, which if you visit our website at alignwealth.com, and there'll be a link in the body of this podcast for you to click on and link to see these two charts that I'm going to be referencing. But essentially what it shows is basically just two metrics. So trying to keep it relatively simple, but looking at two different periods separated by many decades apart. The first, 1975 to 1980, and the second, 2019 to 2024. And in both, looking at U.S. public debt per capita, the percentage change over that period of time, and U.S. real disposable personal income per capita as a percentage change. So in both charts, looking at a percentage change of these metrics, public debt increases per capita and U.S. real disposable personal income per capita. And per capita is important because obviously there's been big population growth over the decades here in the United States. So it wouldn't be fair just to compare public debt today in its raw numbers versus before in a prior decade. Let's look at it per citizen. And what's so fascinating, and this is what really kind of struck me, is in the 1970s, from 75 to 80, U.S. public debt per capita rose over 50%, 50.76% to be precise. That's obviously a very big number in a very short period of time. But what was equally interesting was the increase in U.S. real disposable personal income per capita during that period increased only about 7.7%, just under 8%. So it lagged, obviously, significantly, the increase in public debt per capita, and that was of note. So I looked at the recent period, 2019 to 2024. Most people, and if you're listening to this, you probably are very well aware that we've had a huge increase in public debt in the U.S. government over the past few years. Well, guess how much from 2019 to 2024, specifically 9/30/2019 to 7/31/2024. That U.S. public debt per capita has increased 49.74%. That, right out of the box, I was shocked. It is almost identical to the percentage point of the amount of increase in a 5-year period of time during a period of crisis. So that struck me. So of course, what has happened to real disposable income per capita during this 2019 to 2024 period? Well, Another almost identical type percentage, it has grown 6.39% versus that 7.7%. So very, very similar, within just call it a point and some change. So in both instances, public debt per capita, real disposable personal income per capita, during these two very different crisis periods, very different 5-year economically strained periods that have been marked by very, very high inflation, essentially had macroeconomic conditions that look nearly identical in terms of public debt increase per capita and real disposable personal income. And so the first question that I would ask, and certainly in writing the article, was, well, what kinds of programs were going on during the 70s as compared to what was happening in 2019 to 2024, especially in the pandemic and the aftermath, and what was going on in the 70s? What kinds of programs were they really running from a fiscal standpoint? And I was born in '74, so I don't really remember all that well. Although I was telling one of my colleagues here in the office the other day, I do actually remember my mother using food stamps in the late '70s, and so in my research I found that welfare programs like Aid to Families with Dependent Children, AFDC, was a really big program in the 1970s in order to help families combat the severe energy prices that had just increased, skyrocketed during that period of time, and were really essentially the huge contribution to inflation and reducing the disposable income. But it was very ubiquitous. I mean, everybody in the 70s basically had the ability to get food stamps. And this was a big deal. And so this program, the AFDC program, had a dramatic increase in enrollment because of food stamps and other nutritional assistance programs. And it was significantly expanded. So it was a program that had existed, but they expanded it significantly. So essentially, every American was benefiting from this. And imagine that. I mean, imagine families, middle income families, the middle class. My father was, working as an electrical engineer, having a good salary, but absolutely was a middle class family, and middle class families were really up against it in the 70s. Well, it doesn't look that different today. Unfortunately, it looks very similar, and it's very, very eerie. And the amount of fiscal policies and measures that have been created over the past couple of years, whether it was the CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Paycheck Protection Program, all of these things were skyrocketing the debt, in the U.S. government. And certainly there's a lot of criticism about that having been done, but at the same time, if those programs hadn't been done, it makes me think back to, little Ivan, 5-year-old Ivan, sitting in the shopping cart with mom with food stamps. I think there's many families that probably have been experiencing not only incredible economic hardship, but continue to suffer from the consequences of severe increased inflation over the past 3 years. And all of that is visible in this disposable income, real disposable income, so adjusted after the impact of inflation. And there's just been absolutely meager to pitiful growth of wages over the past few years because of inflation. So the point of this article, and looking back in history and kind of seeing these parallels of increases in debt and while real disposable income isn't moving anywhere, is to really remind us that periods of economic crises does happen, and the country is able to survive them and is able to move past them. And even though it seems that we have this insurmountable amount of debt that the government has created now, over $35 trillion of public debt, which is just an astronomical figure, what is government, a new administration, going to do about reversing course on our public debt load? Does it care? Does anyone actually care anymore about debt and debt issuance of a sovereign nation, specifically that of the United States, who now has an actual debt to GDP ratio of a developed nation that dwarfs any other developed nation in the world except for Japan, which has its own demographic issues that it's been dealing with over the past couple of decades. And then you combine all of this with monetary policies here in the United States that were so accommodative for so long that it frankly drove many people into the stock market because there was nowhere else to get any kind of income or interest income. You couldn't get interest income by investing in a bond because you would have gotten only 1% interest. And if you invested in a stock, you would have got maybe a 3% dividend. So people bought stocks that normally would only buy bonds, coming out of the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And so and that was a ultra accommodative monetary policy for a long, long time. And of course, that was ending before the pandemic hit, and then the pandemic hit, and then we went right back to ultra accommodative policy with ultra low rates. And now, of course, rates are looking more normal, which is great, but we haven't seen really the full impact of a more restrictive monetary policy. Banks are still lending. Banks are very well capitalized, at least the very big ones are. The smaller ones have some issues, which we certainly have some opinions on, and you want to be aware of, especially FDIC limits when it comes to how much cash you're holding in your local bank. It's very prudent to be sure that you read what that FDIC guarantee is. It's $250,000. If you're keeping more than $250,000 in your local small bank, there is a risk. Do not think that 100% of depositors are going to be covered in the next crisis that we have within the banking system. The rules are the rules. There was a special exemption that was made for that Silicon Valley Bank and a couple of other banks that failed in 2023, but don't expect that to be a policy that is continuing into the future, because FDIC does not have enough money to cover every depositor's deposits in this country. It's just an absolute impossibility financially, and the government cannot step in to do that. So that would be like a very simple thing to make sure you are diversifying your deposits across banks. And if you have a financial advisor, check with them to see if they have a corporate treasury management program. That's something that our firm certainly believes in and is very active in, because we can diversify across FDIC insured deposits across many dozens of banks, providing many millions of FDIC coverage, but through brokered CDs, for example. Very simple, very, very easy solution to engage in. And certainly small businesses, large businesses, high net worth families that have a lot of money concentrated at a particular bank. These are very easy strategies to mitigate risk significantly when it just comes to basic cash management. So with that, I'm going to leave it there for this month. And thank you so much for joining me. And of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to visit our website at alignwealth.com. That's ALIGNE wealth.com, and submit any questions you may have there through our Contact Us page, or give us a call at 310-795-0622. We're always happy to answer the phone and have conversations with you as well. Take care.
For more deep thoughts, please subscribe to this podcast. Also, please feel free to visit www.ivanilorn.com to submit questions or topics through the contact page. Until next time, keep thinking deeply.